Good evening, good evening, good evening. Another round of applause, I think. So, I'm going to move from where the story was to where this story is, which is Jamaica. You want to hear the story?
Yeah.
You want it? You sure?
You're ready?
Yeah.
Okay, let's try that again. Crick! Crack! Crick! Crack! Crick! Crack! Give me a nice, sexy rhythm. A bit slower. Slow it down, yeah. Once upon a time, there was a young girl of about 16 years old who lived with her mother and her father in a two-roomed house in Jamaica. One room was for sleeping in and for eating in. The other room was for grinding the corn. And as she'd gotten older, she was given more and more responsibility for grinding the corn. In the room where they ground the corn, there was a hole in the wall. In that wall, she kept the cloth. And after she ground the corn, she dusted off the stone and replaced the cloth. And when she'd finished grinding the corn, her next duty for the day was to take the goats up to the top of the hill so they could graze. And she would sit with her back against a tree and she would dream her dreams. One day, as she was seated with her back against the tree, dreaming her dreams, she saw something very strange. A very tall man, a very handsome tall man, walking up that hill towards her. But he didn't labour up the hill as most people would. He didn't bend his back or bend his knees as most people would. He moved up that hill as tall as a pole. Straight up the hill, bending nothing. And he stood before her. He bent at the waist and he went down to her ear. And he tried to whisper something into that ear. She shrank back. She said, "No, you know, if you whisper in my ears, the man said me not to talk to boys." And so he bowed, he turned, and he went back down that hill in exactly the same way. He went up that hill, straight as a pole. He didn't bend anything. Now, we have to admit something, we women. Sometimes something's staring us right in the face and we go, "I didn't see that, it's nice. I fancy him, I want him, I love him." So she pretended she didn't see what she saw. As Bob Marley would say, she blind her eye to it. But the next day, she was sitting at the top of that hill, having dreamt a dream the night before. A dream where she allowed him to whisper into her ear. A dream where his soft breath had tickled her and warmed her from the outside in. So when she saw him moving swiftly up that hill, when she saw him bend at the waist and bend to speak into her ear, rather than recoiling, she leant in and allowed that warm breath to warm her. And that night as she lay in her bed, she imagined what else he would do with those lips. And the next morning, as she stood there waiting, she saw him coming up the hill. He bent at the waist. She smiled. He whispered in her ear, and then she allowed him to kiss her on the cheek. But when he tried to kiss her on the mouth, she said, "My mother said enough for kiss, boy." But she imagined that kiss, and the next morning, she offered her full brown lips to him. And they kissed, and they embraced. And the next day when he tried to touch her where he shouldn't have touched her, she said, "My mother said enough for the dat." But she did dream about it that night. And the next morning, she let him touch her and stroke her and caress her and kiss her and cradle her in his arms. She allowed him to undress her. She allowed him to part her legs. She allowed him to penetrate her. And for the first time in her life, she felt her legs wrapped around a man's waist. And she felt her legs pulling him in. And he pulled himself out. And she pulled him in and out. You know what I'm talking about. And so it went on. They made love every day on the top of that hill. But the mother, she was a canny one. She was a shrewd one. She had to be. Her daughter was beautiful, and she was 16, and she was drawing the attention of all the young men in the village. So she kept an eye on her daughter. And she made sure that every month, at the allotted time, for those 7 days that her daughter would wash one muslin piece of cloth and hang it over the line while she wore the other. Every month, her mother watched her. But this month, there was no muslin cloth hanging on the line. She didn't say anything at first. No point accusing her yet. Wait for evidence. So she watched 1 month, no cloth. 2nd month, no cloth. 3rd month, no cloth. 4th month, no cloth. She said to her daughter, come here. You have a boyfriend? She said, no, mommy. She said, then why me not see the white cloth on the line? What is going on? And it was then that the girl understood the implications of not seeing that red river every month. It was then and only then that she realized what that in and out had produced within her belly. It was then that she decided to feign the red river by hanging the white cloth on the line. 6th month, 7th month, but her mother was watching her hard. And she was trying to bind up her stomach. She was trying to hide the evidence of her transgression. But she still went to the top of that hill. And she still lay with that man. Because she had blinded her eyes to what you and I know. There's something wrong with this man. There's something not quite right about this man. And when she realized that this thing within her would come out, she said to him, you have to come to my house, you know. You have to meet my parents, you know. And you have to tell them, say, you want married to me because I'm going to have your baby. He said, I can't marry you. I can't come to meet your parents. She said, what do you mean? You give me a baby, they go and beat me. Everybody go and laugh after me. You have to come to my house. You have to come to my house and you have to meet my mother and you have to meet my father and you have to marry to me, otherwise I don't know what I'm going to do. He said, calm yourself down. Cease and settle yourself. I never tell you something now come to your house. I tell you something now marry you. I never tell you something now come to your house. I say I don't want to meet your parents. But I will come to your house and I will live in your house with you. She said, oh, you're going to live in my house with me and my mother and my father and don't meet them. You know, it make no sense. You say, listen, the room where you grind the corn, you don't have a hole in the wall where you keep the cloth. She said, yeah. He said, well, dig out the hole a little deeper and I will live in there. She pretended she had not heard what she had heard. She went home, she dug the hole a little deeper, and he told her also to tell her parents that from this day forward, she wouldn't share that room with them. She would sleep in the room with the corn, with the grinding stone. There'd been thefts in nearby villages. Corn was being stolen. She would protect the corn. She would sleep in that room, and her mother, she eyed her. Her father was oblivious. But the mother said, very well, you can't sleep in that room. That very night, there was a scratching at the door to the stone room. She opened the door, and there he stood in all his beauty. He was beautiful. But she saw and pretended she did not see that as he stepped in through the door, she pretended that she did not see his body shrink, enter, and elongate itself. She blinded her eyes to it. And when she showed him the hole, when she pulled out the cloth and revealed that she dug the hole a little deeper, she pretended she hadn't seen him squeeze himself into that hole. She pretended she hadn't seen him coil himself up and push his head out through the hole and smile his beguiling smile. She blinded her eyes to it. But every night he came out of that hole and they made love. And they ate roasted corn together. And they laughed and they joked together. And the mother pressed her ear against the adjoining door and wondered what was going on. But But whenever she banged on the door and asked her daughter to open, she revealed an empty room. The mother was confused. 9 months had passed, and try as she might, that daughter could not hide that belly. But on the other side of that adjoining door, the mother could hear her daughter screaming, groaning with pain, trying to muffle the sound. This went on for night after night after night, but no child came. It was just the pain, the turmoil inside her belly. And in the end, the mother couldn't take it any longer. She decided to go and see the Obia woman. The Obia woman knew things. The Obia woman knew more things than you and I will ever know. The Obia woman had forgotten more things than you and I would ever know. And when the mother went to see the Obia woman listened and she said, all right, I'll go and help you. The Obia woman took some brown paper. She tore the brown paper into one long strip and she put it on the table. The Obia woman went outside into her herb garden and she took out a handful of herbs. The Obia woman sprinkled the herbs into the brown paper. The Obia woman rolled up the brown paper. The Obia woman put the thing she had made in between her lips. The Obia woman lit the end. The Obia woman drew hard. And she blew. She drew hard. And she blew. She drew one more time. And she blew. And then her eyes rolled back in her head. And she said, And then she opened her eyes and she said, your daughter is pregnant. I know that, said the mother. She took another pull. And then her eyes rolled back in her head. She said, your daughter is pregnant, but not to a man, and he never know that door. The demon is in your house. You have to kill it. You have to get rid of it. You have to lick down the wall to your stone room. You will find the demon in the house. You must make your husband chop it up. You must separate the head from the body. Don't make head and body meet again, otherwise you will never get rid of it. Send away your daughter. Send her to our next village to give birth to the baby. Kill the demon and release your daughter. And then she said, write your daughter's name on this piece of parchment paper. And so the mother wrote her daughter's name on the parchment paper. The old Obia woman, she cut up the parchment paper. And then she said to the mother, go and pick some okra. And so the mother went outside to the Obia woman's garden and she picked okra. And the Obia woman sprinkled the girl's name in parchment paper onto the table. And then she began to squeeze and mush up the okra. And she mixed the okra and the girl's name chopped into pieces on parchment paper. She mixed it up until it was a mulch. And then she put that mulch in a jar. And she put that jar in the light. And she said, when it is dry, your daughter will be safe. Go and do what you have to do. The mother was shaking when she left the Obia woman's house. She walked home. She sat down with her husband and she told her husband everything the Obia woman had said. He said, woman, you're crazy. You are dealing with science. Eh? You don't go to church. You're not a Christian, but you are dealing with science. Eh? What kind of wife you is? She said, listen, if we don't do what she said, we're going to lose with daughter once and for all. There's only one daughter we have, and she carrying with grandchild. We have to separate her from the demon. The wall have to come down and say, "Man, I'm tough to build that wall." Chop. But she convinced him. And the next day, the mother sat with her daughter, and she said, "Me know say you're pregnant. Don't deny it. Me know say you're pregnant, but it's all right. You don't have to face any shame here. I asked one of the neighbors to take you to a nearby village, and you can have the baby there. When the baby is born, we'll come up with some sort of story for explain it when you come back. But don't be ashamed. It's all right. I'm your mother, and I love you. You understand? Now go now to such and such a neighbor. She will take care of you." The daughter was reluctant, of course, because her lover was in the house, and she didn't know what her mother would do, but her mother was insistent. "I don't want to go." She said, "Me tell you, say, you forgot to the next village to breed your baby." He said, "I don't want to go." The mother said, "You don't go, I'm going to take this stick and I'm going to lick the child out of you. Is that you want?" She said, "No, mommy." She said, "Then do as I said." So she packed her things and she went with the neighbor. As soon as she was gone, the men came with their mallets, and they began to strike at that wall and strike at that wall. And as the wall shuddered, the creature, which was all wrapped up, engorged with parched corn, satisfied with its life, rose. Its head came out of the hole, and he saw all those men looking at it. And when the father saw that creature, he said, "Lick down the wall!" And all the men began to strike. They struck and struck and struck at that wall until finally the wall disintegrated, and there it was, a huge, fat, engorged python. The father wielded his machete, but the creature was strong, and it went up on its tail, and it began to fight with the father, and the father began to swing his machete. Every time he swung it, the snake ducked. He swung it again. The snake ducked. He swung it one more time. The snake ducked, but the father was determined. And he waited for it to duck, and he went the opposite way, and snack! Off came the head. The head went one way. The body fell there. And the women, they came and they grabbed the body and they ran off in one direction. And the father, he picked up the head and he ran off in the other. Meanwhile, the daughter, who was on her way to the next village, felt something leaking between her legs. Her waters had broken. She said, "I want to go home to my mother. I want to go home to my mother. No, I'm not having this baby in any other village. I want to go home to my mother." "All right," said the neighbor. "All right, all right." And the neighbor turned around the horse and dray and began to ride back towards the home village. But it's when the girl screamed that she realized something was wrong. It wasn't a scream of labor. It was a scream of horror, because coming from between her legs, sorry, you can see it, can't you? Snakelets coming from between her legs, running this way and that way. And she was afraid, and the neighbor was afraid. The neighbor jumped off that tray and ran. And the girl, she was sitting there, she didn't know what to do. She'd never seen anything like this, she'd never heard of it, she didn't even know what birth was, much less this. And the neighbor ran to fetch the mother, and all the women, they came. And when they saw the little snakelets running around in the bottom of the tray, running over the side, slithering this way and that way, the mother said, "Kill everyone!" And the women, they began to stamp. They worked hard. Each and every one of those snakes was killed. The father snake was dead. The girl was clearly traumatized. The mother didn't know what to do. The father didn't know what to do. There was blood everywhere. Blood from the dead snake all over the ground and on top of the stone for grinding the corn. Blood between her legs. Dead snakelets everywhere. What a day. The mother, she took her daughter to the waterfall, and she washed her from head to toe. The men, they took the grinding stone to the waterfall, and they left it there for 7 days and 7 nights. And while the grinding stone was being cleansed, the girl's name in the jar, mixed with okra, was drying. And while the grinding stone was being cleansed, a mother was talking to her daughter as though she was a woman for the first time in her life. And she spoke with her of what love was and what love was not, and to keep her eyes open wide.